Meeting. We'll begin with introductions.
Bill Daniels.
Sean Datchler.
Mike Mitchell.
Chris Cook.
Doug Neely.
Lisa Novak.
Roger Falatice.
And Joyce Gifford, chair of this committee. Did everybody on the committee get a chance to look at the minutes?
Yes.
Any comments?
Just one. This doesn't have to do with the minutes. We did table the discussion on the signage of the library park, and I don't know if it was on here on the agenda or not.
It is not on the agenda. The last, we can put it under general business if we'd like to discuss.
I have a comment. I'd like to maybe put it under general business. I have some more information on that. We can. I'm looking for some volunteers.
Okay, so making sure that now under general business, or actually number 6F1, we'll put the library sign.
And it's actually two different signs. I think that's not necessarily delineated. One is for the park, and one is for the library itself.
Okay.
So I move to approve the minutes as amended.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? Okay. Citizen comments for items not on the agenda. Do we have any comment cards? And seeing a shake of no.
No,
from
we do not.
Phil. We'll begin with our presentations. And the first one up will be Tom O'Brien on Filbert Run.
Thank you very much. Bill tells me that we have a nice little gadget here that may or may not work, but appreciate the opportunity to speak with you this evening. A couple of us from the Hazel Grove Westling Farm neighborhood met, 2 months ago, I guess, with Phil and Doug, and went over the current condition and so forth of Filbert Run Park. The thought occurred to me that while people like Mike probably know as much about this whole activity as I do, Sean knows quite a bit, and so it's a review for them. Doug, it's a review for, but some of you are newer and have not really understood the background. Now, do you have a copy of that on your screen?
Yeah, so sorry to interrupt. So if you toggle the little switch on the lower left-hand side to presentation, it should show up.
Out of range.
Out of range. Of course it is.
So from here to there is out of range.
Thank you, sir.
The other one I can't.
I've lost everything.
Thank you.
I'm just going to go through a brief timeline of the history of that particular facility without a lot of detail, but to give you a feel for why the neighborhood has, over the years, been so involved. The park itself, I should use the microphone so it can be recorded. The park property itself was part of a negotiation back in 2004. A developer applied to build a planned unit development of R3.5 in an R10 neighborhood. And in order to sweeten the pot a little bit for the city, he agreed to peel off 3.5 acres, which he was not going to be able to build on anyway because it was basically a nature preserve area with a wetland going through the center of it. So he donated 3.5 acres, and it sat there from 2004 until some problems developed in 2012. In 2012, one of the neighbors came to our neighborhood association meeting in January of that year and voiced concerns about this city-owned property. The city had owned the land for 7 years and was constantly in violation of city ordinances regarding overgrown properties. Neighboring property owners had complained to the code enforcement officers over the years with limited results. There had been some fires that spread to neighbors' fences, a number of different things. But in that particular time period, prior to our meeting in January of 2012, what called attention to it as a really dangerous situation was that a small girl was heard to be crying, lost in the weeds. And it was so overgrown that she could not see her way clear to get out of that area. And so the neighbor, hearing the crying, managed to assist her in getting her out and into safety. And then he showed up at our meeting and said, you know, we could use some assistance as an organization for the neighborhood to try to improve the situation in this park area. So we approached at the time the people in charge of parks, and Scott Archer was responding. He agreed to attend our next meeting in March of that year and fielded questions and tried to give some answers, but really wasn't on board insofar as remedying the situation for us. So there was an opportunity at a conversations with the commissioners meeting where Doug Neely and Kathy Roth were conducting the meeting, and we had an opportunity to ask them if they would give us an assist, which they agreed to do. Shortly after that, they, as well as the city manager, met with us at the park to try and better understand what was really going on. And from that point forward, then in 2012, we started to get some help and some assistance. Some of the safety concerns with sidewalk drop-offs and that sort of thing. We were getting help from the Parks Department to bring in soil so that we might build up the soil level so people weren't falling off or tripping off of those areas. They gave us more help in terms of providing for our volunteers dumpsters to fill up with some of the debris and down timbers and so forth. So during 3 major organized events, 60 neighborhood volunteers expended more than 400 hours of clearing up the debris. Other small work groups spent significant hours on smaller projects along the way. Members of a local Girl Scout troop got involved with us. There were 17 of these large 40-yard dumpsters that were filled with garbage and debris and burnt fire things from the druggies, and just unbelievable what we were finding in there. We completed those efforts within about a year and a half. By August of 2013, we were ready to move on a little bit. And we were told at the time that in order to do anything further in terms of development, we'd need to have some park concept plans, and they were going to work on doing that, and they did. With a great deal of help from PRAC, master plans were developed for both Filbert Run and Glen Oaks. Mike Mitchell and myself were among those who served on the consultant selection committee. Lango Hansen was chosen partly because they had helped the city in the past to obtain grants on previous projects. They did an outstanding job of listening to the residents of both communities and developed terrific plans for both parks. I was fortunate enough to be able to attend most of those meetings for both parks, and I really was impressed with the way Lango Hansen, and particularly Kurt Lango, handled things and just really listened to what the residents had to say and what they wanted, and then was able to incorporate them into the plans, the final plans. Moving on to 2015, finally it got around to the point where on May the 12th it was presented to the City Commission at that time, and they reviewed it, but of course there's no funding. And so, you know, where do you go from here? It's now almost May of 2017 and there's still no funding. But in looking at things recently with Phil and with Doug, we realized that it's really starting to slide backwards again into pretty poor condition. And so I'm going to show you some pictures, some photos. And if you would help us there, Phil, I appreciate it. It's been 44 months since our neighborhood did the improvements. And it's gotten to the point now where, due to the uneven ground and the nature of the accumulation of debris, toddlers and seniors are not able to very effectively use the wooded area, which is the area that the seniors particularly like to use. winter storms have caused some additional erosion in the stream area. So, which one of these buttons do I push?
The right-hand side one.
Okay.
There you go.
So this gentleman is in the audience tonight. He's a little over 6 feet tall, and I think that's a little bit descriptive of the condition that we started with. Overgrown, just debris everywhere, weeds. You can understand how a child could get lost in there. They had hired a prison crew, or put to work a prison crew a number of years before, who had gathered some of the fallen timbers and stuff and piled them up in numerous piles. But nobody ever got around to removing the piles. They just sat there waiting for rats and other animals to infest in them and, create a problem for the neighborhood. Another one. So it's obvious that we had our work cut out for us, but the neighborhood was willing to get behind it because our safety of our children was at concern. And the city at some point had planted some evergreen trees in the area, knowing that the other trees were fairly mature, most of them, but no care was taken to protect them or in any way see that they would grow. So about half of them were killed off by weeds just strangling them. That one I showed was probably one of the better ones. This one looks like it's a fighter and it's going to make it. This one probably would not have made it if we hadn't done something to clear around it. You can see they weren't getting the nutrients and the things that they needed in order to grow properly. So it was kind of a waste of time and money to have planted them. There were a lot of dead timbers strewn throughout. There's a lot of species that were invasive, that were strangling through the trees and so on. And so working with the city and with the city leadership, we were able to get commitments to allow us to go in there and clean this up. And PRAC was supportive of the effort as well. And we really appreciated the opportunity to turn that into something a little bit more livable for the neighborhood. Oops, went too far. I mentioned, I think, earlier that we had some coyote problems in there taking care of our neighborhood's pets. At least that was what the police department said when we called them in and asked them to see what they thought. Trash. This is one of the examples of drop-off. The developer, in putting in the development, was required to put in sidewalks along Hazelnut Avenue. However, there were no requirements for it. He simply put the forms in, put the sidewalk in, and he was done and went. Meanwhile, you look at a picture like this, and what we were confronted with was that it was undercutting underneath the sidewalk, and the sidewalk was going to collapse. And it was a big tripping hazard or a fall-off hazard for younger kids in the neighborhood. So the city was gracious enough to bring in a couple loads of dirt. We graded it up to that, backfilled underneath the concrete, try to preserve it and keep it from failing further. And this was taken kind of after we'd cleaned things up quite a bit. And that area where the initial shot was with the gentleman standing in 6 foot of weeds is just off to the right here as you look at the picture. There is a wetland there sometimes of the year, times like this time of the year. Unfortunately, this winter has been particularly harsh, and further downstream of this, Doug, when he was out there, and Phil, when he was out there, noticed that there was quite a bit of erosion going on as the bed of the waterway made its turn. It was cutting into the hillside, the banks of the stream, and eroding pretty severely at this point. So there's some problems continuing to develop. Here's an example of the 2 Girl Scout troops that assisted us. They had set a personal goal for themselves of removing 50 wheelbarrow loads of debris. And they met that challenge. They met that goal that they had set for themselves. And so we very much appreciated their getting involved in what will be a future park for their children and so on. In the very beginning, when we met with the city manager and with Doug and Commissioner Neely, or Commissioner Roth, we pointed out to them that this map was in error, that the stream bed is not in that part of the park. The stream bed is actually over here, completely away from the trees, in the open area, on the other parcel of land. I looked this morning, and this map is still on the city's GIS website, even though it was asked to be changed back in 2012, spring of 2012. This is what the contractor, Kurt Lango, had in his drawings as to where the stream was, and that, in fact, is where it is. I wanted to share with you also the fact that both the Filbert Run and the Glen Oaks parks are on the trails plan map. The red arrows indicate the two parks and their proximity to hiking trails. I'm going to show you blow-ups of both. This is the blow-up of the path that goes right through the heart of the Filbert Run Park, between the two green arrows. And this is the green arrows indicating where the trail just to the north on the Myers Road extension, if you would, is in proximity to the Glen Oak Park. So they both have trails involved in the park issues. I wanted to show you an overhead view. These are both done at the same level of resolution. In the red arrow there, that's where the Filbert Run Park is. The areas around where the green arrows are currently underway. Many homes already been built, but there's still a lot to be built. They're adding 123 home sites immediately across Central Point Road on the other side. So you can see the density of the housing that's already in there. In our Hazel Grove Westling Farms neighborhood, there are 886 addresses. Of those 886 addresses, roughly 95% of those homes have been built since system development charges for parks were established in the city. So when you take that number and you multiply it by what a system development charge typically has been, according to city numbers, the residents in this area have funded more than $3 million into the system development funds for parks. And we don't have any park to show for it at this point. We would love to have one. Here's a similar view, and I cut it off. Unfortunately, I should have included the housing to the south, but the red arrow again indicates the proximity of other things to Glen Oaks Park. Just to get an overview of the amount of green space available one versus the other, we have an area behind McLaughlin Elementary School that has some green space that can occasionally be used. But beyond that, we really don't have in our neighborhood anything but wall-to-wall houses. There's some sidewalks, fortunately for us, but there are not sidewalks along a good portion of Central Point and even along South End Road in proximity to McLaughlin Elementary School. We continue to have issues with children being able to walk anywhere in our neighborhood because of lack of sidewalks in many strategic locations. I went by today on Central Point, and because of the new development, they're now widening that to 4-lane road, and I don't know, from what I've understood, that there are any plans to put in a crossing signal or anything of that nature to allow people from that new area across the other side to get across the road and come to Filbert Run Park even. So, any support or efforts that you can share in that regard, we'd appreciate it. These were taken this morning, just to give you an idea how rough it's getting again in terms of the undercarriage or the undertow of the park, making it extremely difficult for seniors as well as toddlers to walk around in that area. And I just took several shots to kind of give an overview of what it's looking like today. Here's a fallen timber that's kind of half hung up in one of the trees that a good windstorm could fall on somebody. Someone's been in there helping to alleviate some of the conditions and piling up some of the fallen timbers in the area around some of the bases of the trees. I'm not sure which neighbor has done that. Here's what the waterway looks like this morning, looking kind of in the opposite direction toward the inlet at the top of the photo. And we'll finish with something really positive. We're certainly happier to have ducks than we were to have the coyotes. So as bad as it's getting now, things aren't all gloom and gloom. So we just, as a neighborhood, would like as much support as you can give us to help us achieve something. And I'm sure the neighborhood will once again be willing to put forth an effort to partner with the city. But I keep getting questions from the neighborhood, when are we going to get our park? And I have to keep saying, Lord only knows. So give us some consideration, please. And, allow us to work with your people. I think a lot of things can be done. One of the concerns Phil had and his people had is that area is so full of debris now, it's difficult for them to get in there and do anything. If we were to clean it up, I would see that we would want or need some assistance. I should say John Lewis has been very helpful to us going along, much more so than the park people have been. John has lent equipment for us to use in our cleanups. He has agreed to allow one of his employees who lives adjacent to the park to operate machinery that otherwise we would not have access to. I think some of the stones and boulders and that sort of thing probably could be done with volunteer help with the assistance of city equipment. It may not be equipment that's available through the Parks Department, but it is available through the city. And, I think working together, we can achieve an awful lot at a very low cost. Maybe level some of the areas where the paths are a little bit rough. And we don't need the glorified plan at this point. We don't need the complex of park that's on the master plan. What we need is to be able to use what we have and not let it fall back to where it was. We do need some attention to that creek bed. It's just waiting to create a problem for us, both from a liability standpoint and a natural. So thank you for allowing me to share with you, and we appreciate whatever support you can afford, Phil, to give to us.
Thank you. Thanks, Tom.
Did any of you have any questions for Mr. O'Brien?
I have a question.
Bill?
So the park has been master planned, did I hear that right?
Yes, both plans, the master plans were developed simultaneously, the two of them, and the consultant, Kurt Lango, had 3 meetings with each neighborhood. All 6 meetings were very well attended by both neighborhoods. Plans were approved by the planning department. They were presented in May of 2015 to the city commission, but beyond that, without funding, nothing happens. And the funding situation is such that the Filbert Run Park has a estimated cost figure of $910,000. The Glen Oak Park is 4 times that at $3,700,000. So it's 1/3 the size and 1/4 the cost. And we understand the facts of life are that you're not going to get your park until grant monies are available. But there doesn't seem to be any reason to let things continue to deteriorate the way they have for the last 2.5 years without making some effort, whether it's a shared situation on our part to work and save the city some money to accomplish it by providing the man hours, We can achieve an awful lot at a very low budget cost with volunteer help, such as ivy pools.
So it might be an idea that you could, as funds are released from the SDCs, that you could prioritize what you would like to, how you would like to see your park developed through that master plan.
I think Phil brought up a very good point when we met a couple months ago, is that, people who do park work are not anxious to get out there and bid at a competitive price on a $900,000 park. They got better ways to put their employees to work where they can get a better profit. So we're not fooling ourselves that we're going to be getting funding to complete that master plan. Mm-hmm. What we really need is we need the main path that meanders through there to be graded a little bit, even if it's not paved. If it's just simply graded so that people aren't tripping, it's an improvement over where it is today. That's clay soil in a lot of cases, and it's very slippery when it's wet. We, of course, never have any moisture in Oregon. And so, at one point, some of the children in the neighborhood had built kind of a jump along the path for their bicycles. And so we knocked that down as best we could, but it really does need some minor grading. I'll let Phil give his thoughts on, what he sees as a potential.
So some of the discussion that we had was around the economy of scale. So, like you referenced, doing one project as opposed to breaking it up for less than $1 million project as a whole would make more sense for the city to invest in doing one project, do the whole park at one time, as opposed to phasing of a park, staff time associated. More than likely, when firms get to bid on projects that are smaller in scale, they'll just throw a number out that's above what they might have typically bid on a project that was larger, and to be a little bit tighter with the numbers. And so what we probably would end up with if we end up doing a phased approach is paying more money as a city to accomplish the same results. So part of the discussion was around timing, trying to do some of the projects on an interim basis with just staff time and volunteer efforts, and then really looking at when we could line up the opportunity for grants and for SDC funds in order to develop the park. As we've discussed as a group in PRAC, Filbert Run, in addition to Glen Oak, are our priority locations for development. And currently we have some grant opportunities out for Glen Oak, and that Filbert Run I would see as being the next park that we do develop when we have the opportunity for both staff time as well as resources available.
That kind of begs the question, though, of how can we use the resources, the volunteer resources that has been referred to? You're talking about the overall meeting the master plan, but I think you're right. I think there's a lot of opportunities for with a bit of support to actually do some things without a tremendous cost associated with it.
You're going to eventually grade that path anyway. Mm-hmm. The main stretch through the heart of the park. Why not grade it with volunteer help and city equipment? It'll be that much less in the bid eventually when the park gets built. I don't care about the surrounding paths all around the park and that sort of thing. We got a nice play area, and the city's done an excellent job of keeping that mowed. What we have to do to enable them to keep the weeds down is we have to get in and remove the boulders and tree stumps and things like that could potentially damage their mowing equipment. And, there again, we already pulled a bunch of stumps. One of our neighbors had a heavy-duty tractor, and he brought it in. And with the park's permission, we were able to pull a bunch of stumps out previously. But there's more there, and there's some rocks that have shown their top in their head. And, I wouldn't want to put my equipment in there. And I know that one of our neighbors who was mowing it himself went through 3 lawnmowers on it. That's how rough it is. So I'm not saying it has to be completely graded, but the path should be graded, and I think we ought to pull out some of those things that keep Phil's staff from being able to effectively get in there and manage the grounds a little bit better. And those are all things that can be done with volunteers.
Sean?
Phil, does your staff have the capacity this summer, for example? I think that the primary need right now is just to be able to access through the trail. So grade it, possibly put some sort of bark chips down. And I think I remember in Boy Scouts helping do probably a mile-long trail on a Saturday. So that's only 150 or 200 yards. Does your department have the capacity to support that sort of a volunteer effort?
Possibly. We've had, just to give you a scale of what the parks crew are dealing with. So we have 5 full-time staff right now that are out maintaining the parks. We do hire on 4 or 5 seasonals, depending on the time of year that we have out there. So during the very peak season, the middle of July, beginning of August, we usually have 5 staff seasonals that are out there in addition. So, I think that, some of the discussions we've had behind the scenes is how to maximize our personnel costs in order to try to get an additional seasonal or 2 that can, help to share the workload. Because right now, the guys are just out there and they're trying to keep up. They're treading water. And so bringing on, a park that is currently not identified as a developed park and to attach additional resources and staff time is difficult. But doing, projects and using our resources that we have in a thoughtful way, particularly when we have volunteers that are willing to go out and help supplement, that's something that we probably definitely could look at. We have had a conversation, Jonathan Waverly and I, after the meeting that we had on site, to bring in additional soils to build up along that pathway on the side, where we currently still have that lip for the concrete. Yeah. And then additionally to put in some additional rock in the swale so that we're not having that erosion issue on the corner there. So we have a couple of minor projects planned. You hit the nail on the head as far as the rocks. There are some rocks that are there. When you get into it, they might be very, very large rocks that are there. So just because you only see the top of it, if anyone who's tried to dig a rock out before, it could be, it's just at the surface, or it could be a boulder the size of a Volkswagen that you're trying to pull up. So, we're open to partnering and trying to find solutions that work. We're also, realist to a point, that we unfortunately don't have the staff that we would like to have in order to do the work that needs to be done.
The neighborhood recognizes that. As I said before, we have one of the neighbors who has a couple small children himself who works for Public Works, James Peck. And James is willing to contribute his days off and his Saturday or weekends when equipment from the city is not being utilized for other means to operate some of that equipment on behalf of the neighborhood and get things done that need to be done there. We don't want to operate the equipment because we're not professionals or know how to do it. And that would be a liability for the city. But a city employee who uses that equipment and knows how to use it properly, as long as there aren't a whole lot of other people standing around watching and getting in his way, can work with 2 or 3 others and achieve a fair amount in a half a day. And, those are the kinds of things we think make sense to the city, both from a financial perspective and to achieve a workable park that gives you some time to find those grants that are necessary to develop it properly. So, but at least it's usable.
Mike?
Several thoughts. First off, a minor correction. The master plan that's done is kind of a concept plan, but it has not gone before the planning department.
Okay.
So it's
I thought
the idea. No,
Okay.
nothing's been presented. There's no construction drawings. There's nothing yet to take to the planning department. So the idea of doing a path, the chances of it being in the right place are pretty slim. That's not to say it's not a bad idea. You know, especially with volunteer labor, it might be worth doing. I guess
Might be cost
first off,
effective.
I should say, in the interest of full disclosure, I do live closer to the Glen Oak Park site. And I just want to bring up again that there is no developed park on the east side of Highway 213. So Glen Oak naturally is, but is more of a concern, I think, in our big picture. But I want to make everybody know that it would also be the closest park to me. I don't live that close to it, but I do live walking distance to it. Glen Oak looks like your before pictures. You couldn't use Glen Oak at all if you wanted to.
Right.
And
In
to
fact,
your neighborhood's credit, you've got it to a point where it's usable, but you've almost got it to a point where it's almost an attractive nuisance. And I don't mean that in any kind of legal sense or anything, but you can walk out in there and then you can get in trouble. Whereas opposed to nobody's going to try to go into Glen Oak because you can't get past the blackberry bushes to get onto the site.
I remember how they had to cut into it in order to have the first meeting there.
In order to have a meeting, exactly. So I guess what I'm saying, I like the volunteer idea. Obviously, I believe in volunteerism in parks, or I wouldn't be involved in the Parks Foundation.
Why don't you get your neighborhood to volunteer to do the same thing at Glen Oak?
I don't. It's too big and too far gone.
That's what we thought. That's what we thought till the job got lost in there.
It's what is it? 32 acres, I think.
That's about 9.
Glen Oak's about 9 acres.
Anyway,
9.1.
I'll stop. We appreciate everything that has been done. It has been too long. In fact, in the scoring, one of the things that was brought up in the scoring for the grant that we submitted last year for Glen Oak, one of the judges said there hasn't been any public involvement on this since 2015, ? So it's time to pull the trigger. We got 2 parks that we need to move forward to some degree. And we've got, I can't pin the number, but there's several $1 million in the SDC fund. So, time to move.
So there's. I guess I'm asking Mike or someone else. So there's nothing they can do right now, really, except keep it clean. That's because they haven't got any plans approved.
Well, no.
Okay.
So the master plan, as people call it, is not a true master plan. It is a conceptual master plan, which has not gone through planning yet. It has been adopted as kind of a vision of what the park will be, with the elements which were vetted through the public involvement process, but it is not, again, as far as the appropriate location of fixed assets within the property, determining where where the trail will go, things like that might shift a little side to side depending on the appropriateness of the site after going through the review process through planning.
But they could put a temporary trail through there. Is that legal, or
People are just making the run already.
Yeah, so I would say it could. There's trails through the property that people go past, that people use, that are used regularly enough that it's delineated from the rest of the property. And there would be, I believe, not an issue with putting, a soft surface trail in there because it is permeable. There wouldn't be any issues with, as far as development. I think what we come back to is very limited resources and staff time, and additional limited resources in, just supply costs and things like that to put into a site that, again, is not fully developed, won't be a permanent fix. Again, not to say that that's not something that we couldn't do and shouldn't do, but it is a balance for us from a staff perspective to find enough time to do the things that are being requested all across the city, particularly on a site where we, as a city, have a developed park at that location. So it's something to balance, and again, not something that I'm opposed to necessarily, but just giving you kind of some of the background information.
There's certainly no one other than yourself and Mike who know better the lack of maintenance issues that we have in the parks, and Doug, of course. To partly answer your question, Roger, we had the support and the permission from the city commissioners and the city manager when we went through our initial year and a half of cleaning things up. I see no reason why we wouldn't have similar support from the city at this stage if we were to be given the go-ahead to go ahead and utilize some of the resources the city does offer without involving a lot of staff time. Naturally, we would clear everything first with Phil and the department to make sure we're not doing anything we shouldn't do, and we followed that procedure pretty much right along. We understand that you play by the rules and you do what needs to be done. But we also, as a neighborhood, are willing to contribute even more effort than we already have to get it into some semblance of order again to enable the youth and the elderly people to utilize it. And right now, they can't. So
Do you have grant writing ability through the neighborhood?
we do not, no. And that was one of the reasons, Michael, back this up, I'm pretty sure, when we selected, there were eight companies who applied initially to do the work. And of those, we ended up interviewing personally 5, I think, 4 or 5.
Yeah, 4 or 5.
4 or 5. And there was still some discussion amongst us after those 5 interviews as to, well, I kind of like this one, and I kind of like that one, and somebody else liked that one. And, we had to pick one. And Scott Archer at the time came forward and he said, well, we've had good luck working with Lango Hansen. They have supported us in grant applications on several of our other parks. I think we ought to go in that direction because they're able to help us with grants. And so the people who were making the decision on who to hire, pardon me, went in the favor of Lango Hansen for that reason, that supposedly they were able to give and assist in that vital area. It's been, a long time now, 2 years since May of 15, and I don't know if we've had any contact. We've had some change in personnel, one thing or another, but it would be worth pursuing, I would think, to call Kurt Hansen up or Kurt Lango up and say, hey, what do you know about out there that could be applied for?
If you, okay, I haven't talked to Mike about this, but there is a possibility for you to write grants. Would you write grants if you had the access to write them?
I don't know anything about writing grants.
Okay.
I've never written a grant.
All right.
Yeah, and I would
And
say
I'd screw it up.
And I would say, as far as grant opportunities, for again, we're looking at probably $1 million plus project by now, with construction costs the way that they are. Looking at the cost for developing the park, I would imagine that next year through state parks we will probably apply for a grant for Filbert Run, and obviously it's something that we would look at strategically in how we apply and what that dollar amount is and what the match would be. But I could very easily see a proposal coming forward from city staff for Filbert Run in the next grant cycle.
Are there any other smaller grants out there that would be tappable?
See, I could talk to you about it later. I don't want to take this time up, but there is a possibility of you getting a grant and through the foundation, and there's ways of doing it. But we could talk about that if you want to talk about that, right? Is that
We can
right?
talk offline.
Sure.
Yeah. If Mike's agreeable.
Yeah,
Sure.
and I would say
yes.
for the size of the grants that might be I mean, and again, grants vary, but if you're looking at a smaller grant opportunity, that might be appropriate for an interim use
that's what I'm thinking.
for the project.
That's what I'm thinking.
So, Phil, as a question, is it useful when you're going for those grants to show that there's community involvement, that the neighbors have been mowing and whacking down the weeds
Absolutely.
and rescuing
Extremely.
small
Bring
children?
up their personal lawnmowers.
Extremely, yes. I would believe it would be very well received, knowing the community involvement process that has happened at that location.
Okay.
I have a question. If all was perfect, if the park was developed, how many residents do you think would use it on a daily, weekly basis?
Very good question. When we initially embarked on changing the conditions that were going on there, we had volunteers come forward who said they would like to distribute invitations to our first work party. And we looked at the situation, we said this is a neighborhood park. Even though there are 54 on-street parking spots alongside the park, very few people are going to drive to this park. So what are we realistically talking? That radius of about 6 blocks in any direction from the park is where we distributed the invitations for people to join the work party. Yes, there are people that live further away. There are people that are down off the end of South End Road. There are all kinds of other areas in our neighborhood that are newer developments, but they've paid their fees, but they're not really interested in walking over to that park. I think realistically at the furthest I've seen maybe people from 8 blocks away, you know, realistically speaking. I think most of the people down Doug's Way walk to it readily. You know, it's close for them. I'm a little concerned with what's happening on the other side of Central Point Road because of the traffic situation. We still have a 45, is it, or 40?
It's still 45.
45 mile an hour speed through that zone that the children would have to cross now a 4-lane road to get to the park.
Yeah.
Now, that's a deterrent in most mothers and dads' eyes.
Yeah, I know. I was thinking of
Drops down
Central
to
Point.
35 at Partlow, but I don't know whether there's 40 or 45 coming up the hill. And they you know,
Central Point's
nobody
45
maintains posted speeds in the city.
Yeah, but 5 miles more on a 45-mile thing is different than 5 miles faster on a 35-mile speed limit. So,
Right.
yeah.
And it takes them about 4 blocks to slow from 45 to 35.
A couple of one's an observation, the other one's just a statement. But I personally think that you might get greater use because I've seen an increase in the number of parents that are walking children throughout the neighborhoods far more than even 10 years ago. And if you had a park there, I think you'd have a greater radius than you're talking about.
You got a lot of newer families with young children right now in this neighborhood. And you have people, you know, old farts like me.
The other thing I want to mention, and I agree with you, it's nice to have the money to do it all at once, and phase development is probably more expensive. We wouldn't have a Wesley Lynn Park if we didn't have phase development there.
True.
So,
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much, Tom. Because you know I bring it up every month. I ask, don't I? And we will continue to do
Yes.
that. You are on our radar. Okay. Is this on the same subject or? Okay.
Fill it out on the way out if it's easier.
Wait till you get to the microphone and then you can
Have it on
go ahead and
recording.
do your introductions.
So I'm Chris Engelke, and I'm an immediate neighbor of the park. I live within a block or so. And I would just like to highlight a couple of the points that Tom made. First of all, thanks to Tom for doing all this. He's a great asset to our neighborhood. And someone just brought up possibly getting the park plan into phases, and I think that would be an awesome idea. You said that it's not, the plan isn't moved beyond a design. What needs to happen to get that further? Does it take more money to pay an engineer to draw up the construction plans? Is that the hurdle at this point?
Yes.
Okay.
And if
We
I
would
know
need
just enough about
construction
this to be
documents.
dangerous.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we would need construction documents in order to move forward.
And that has to go to the planning commission. But they have to see what is going to be built, elevations and construction materials and the whole 9 yards.
Right. So
And
I'm
that
just
takes-
thinking of
And that takes
Takes money.
More money.
I mean, you're looking at probably, a third of the cost is going to be in soft costs associated with construction documents and permitting and all those types of things.
would that kind of thing be done by the design firm or someone else?
By the design firm in cooperation with the city and city staff.
So I'm just thinking, I'm on Facebook quite a bit with our neighborhood groups, and if I could encourage people to, get activated in this process, we would want to know what's the next thing that needs doing, aside from the current maintenance of the site. It'd be great if I could contact you later or find out, if there's things that the neighbors could do politically or in other ways besides, mowing. Then we can have a direction to, help this process along. So it sounds like that's the next thing that needs to happen, and the grants are what we need to fund the planning, right? Is
Correct.
that
Yeah, a portion of
I
the
understand
funds.
it?
Yeah.
Okay. Would it help at all to also get kind of a survey of users? You brought up, how many people, how important is this? I could probably also help with that in terms of just, getting counts or, input from the community on how they would use it, how many families are there with children, how many other people, walking their dogs and this kind of thing. Would that help, or is it just kind of extra data at this point?
Let me answer this kind of broadly. So my second year on PRAC was when Scott Archer negotiated this purchase or agreement to own that property. And I think we're at the point we're at today, it's crystal clear to us and the city of where the park deeds are in the city. And there's no doubt that this is an extreme priority, as is Glen Oak. It simply comes down to funding and timing, and it's extremely sad when I ran into a person that was at the design meeting for Glen Oak, 2 weeks ago, and he says, "Oh, I met you at that meeting. What's ever going to happen with that thing? It's still a weed patch." And sitting here for my 12th year, that it's a really slow-moving bus, and it doesn't take away the need, but it's going to happen. It just doesn't happen in the time frame anybody can imagine even.
Right.
And starting in 2003, watching this to where we are now, it's still hard to believe 14 years later we're having this discussion and it's still not serving the community. But I think to your point with Facebook and these other things, I don't think that's an issue now. I mean, I would think, personally, I think that would be wasted energy. The energy
that's what I wanted to know.
Is letters of support for the grants from neighborhood associations saying we've been involved and we're pushing. Go down to the state when they're doing these grant reviews and testify if those opportunities are there. That's what's going to make the change this time.
Okay.
And also keeping track of the volunteer man hours.
Absolutely.
When you do have a party there, how many, people are there, and how long were they there for, and, so that when we apply for those, when the city applies for those grants, we can say this is, the number of man hours that have been put in so far, to keep it.
Shows the interest
Yeah,
and the momentum of the community. Okay. Well, Tom has my contact information. If there's anything that we can do in terms of tapping other resources in the community, he can let me know. Maybe we can dig
And
up
talk
a
to
grant
Roger.
writer or, something like that.
There's the Parks Foundation.
Parks Foundation.
You might want to come to our meeting.
Okay. And that's Oregon City
Parks Foundation.
Parks Foundation.
Yes. And the meeting was fourth Tuesdays
Fourth Tuesdays.
at the Depot Bistro.
Oh,
Facebook page
Incentive.
is Oregon City Parks Foundation.
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Not
much.
to throw in a commercial, but
Thank you.
there it was.
If you wouldn't mind making sure
It's all parks.
That's right.
comment.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay. Anyone else wanting to make comments tonight?
No, I think we're good.
Then we'll move on to general business on our agenda. Willamette Falls Legacy Project. Mr. Lewis.
So the Willamette Falls Legacy Project, this is a standing update. Most recently, last night, which many of you were at, we had the first of 3 transportation access summits. I don't know if there's anyone who was present that would like to chat a little bit about what that involved. Those
Most
that
of us were
volunteered.
there.
Yeah.
It was a good meeting. I'll speak.
Thanks, Lisa.
Good presentation by Rick Williams Consulting to start off with. We split up, after the presentation, we split off into teams and we did a brainstorming session. And after that, we all got back together and we presented our ideas. What struck me is the commonality across the teams. There were points and ideas that each team had that were the same. So that struck me as interesting. Everyone seemed to have the same goal and vision in mind. Learning about parking, that was a whole, for me personally, that was interesting, a whole science to parking. So I actually went on to Rick Williams' website today to see what that was all about. No decisions were made at this juncture. 2 more meetings, May and July.
So they are open to the public, so anyone is welcome to attend. Again, they will have them in May and July, and they're on the Rediscover the Falls website as well as the city website. So if you want additional information, feel free to visit either of those sites.
But Roger and our group, we had the best one. They got the laugh of the night. Yeah.
And the most unique idea, too.
Yeah.
Oh,
I could believe that was your idea.
Which one?
With the zip line?
The zip lines? That was mostly John, but yeah.
Absolutely.
The other, again, just to reiterate, June 3rd, 1 to 5 o'clock at OMSI will be the unveiling of the preferred conceptual design. There is a lot of work happening behind the scenes right now to get ready for that. The 75% design has been reviewed. They're working towards a almost complete design that will be brought before the technical advisory committee and then presented to the partners group just before the public unveiling process. So things are happening pretty quickly, and very excited about the June 3rd date again for the public unveiling.
You know what the time is?
1 to 5 o'clock at OMSI, and
OMSI.
there's free parking that day. So, speaking of transportation, if driving is your preferred mode, there will be free parking, assuming that all the spots are not taken.
Of course, you get there by bus and Max.
You can. That's my bus, actually.
Right. And going back to the Willamette Falls, I would just like those of us who went on the tour just to, give a sentence or two about any new things that you learned on the tour, or anything that you want to share that really opened your eyes about the potentials or the pitfalls of this space.
I think one thing that came up that I've seen it before, but looking at not only using the PGE Dam as the access point to the falls, but looking at other other ways to get out to there. From the practical standpoint, the PG does maintenance on those dams and would be closed off at certain times of the year. And I think there's some great ideas that are being thrown out there in terms of that possible design.
Zip lines, right. Okay. All right. Bill, was that one of your first times of going out there?
It's a nice perspective. I can easily see water taxis being a huge service to that whole area and relaxing the parking issues that were discussed last night. There's plenty of opportunity for recreation as well as commercial use for water access to that area.
I would just say it's my third time, and I was amazed when we turned the corner at the Holly building, the sound. Because I'd never seen it with that much water going over the falls, and the sound indicated the power, and it just kind of struck me. That was my takeaway. And there's so many things that are historical that I enjoy the other times, but that was my takeaway this time.
I missed that one. I've been on a tour. I wasn't able to make that one, but just a quick thing about that meeting last night. I continually am amazed at the cost of municipal construction. And one of the things that came up, and it's been talked about for, Doug, you can probably answer this better than anybody else, is how many years we've talked about the need for a parking garage somewhere for downtown and especially now this area. And $30,000 to $35,000 per space to build a parking garage. It's crazy.
You shook in your seat when he said that. I saw you.
I mean, come on. Anyway, that's it.
The tour, it was wonderful. It was my first time. One word, awesome. As far as the waterfall, the natural resource, I was astounded. I've done a lot of traveling in my life, and this is etched in my mind as something, one of the most wonderful natural resources I've seen. Aside from that, the historical value, it would be wonderful if I realize that not all of the buildings can be saved, but it would be nice I would like to be able to see at least as much as possible of a historical resource to be able to maintain there. It was just fantastic. The people, the lives that have been spent there, the working lives, the people who have built this city, to me that was just really something also that stays in my mind. It was a lot of fun watching the sea lions too, so I enjoyed that. But I see a lot of value in the future as far as tourism. I think it'll be a spectacular location. So looking forward to seeing it being developed.
Yeah, I just want to say this is the second time I've been on a tour, and every time, well, both times I've gone out, especially this, you get more energized. If you feel your battery's running low, that's a good place to go to get re-energized with the whole project and projects around the city. And if anybody, everybody should go on the tour. That's what my recommendation, because it's just you don't know it until you do it, and then you realize what's there.
Okay. Thank you. Are we moving on? Mm-hmm. All right. Waterfront Master Plan. Standing update.
So again, this is a standing update. Starting in May, we'll begin the process of putting together the RFP for that project. We will have, hopefully, funding for the master plan approved at the budget meetings this next week through City Commission, and then be able to have a full green light to begin the planning for Clackamas Park, and then, again, the associated properties across the street next to the McDonald's, as well as the boat ramp and RV park.
Not quite as straightforward as Glen Oak and Filbert Run.
Definitely not.
There's going to be some lively discussion. All right. Okay. Good news on the Ermatinger House.
Yes. So we did share at City Commission, the last City Commission meeting. We have a May 1st anticipated construction completion date for the drywall and paint. We have passed inspections to date and are still planning on the May 1st for the anticipated completion. We're working with the Friends Group on finalizing terms on their proposal to operate the facility, and beginning to put together a vetting out the logistics for the furniture plan, furniture selection, as well as the interpretive signage pieces for the facility. We're looking at the June 23rd and 24th, the Oregon City Heritage Days, as being open on those days for that event. And if everything goes as planned, to hopefully be able to have somewhat of a soft opening, possibly that Friday before, where we open the facility and kind of just work the kinks out and make sure that we have everything lined up. Again, this would be a shooting for the 23rd and 24th as kind of events as opposed to an actual opening of the facility. But again, working with the Friends Group and stakeholders to open the facility as soon as possible for general admission on a regular basis.
That was the 23rd and 24th of?
I'm sorry, of June. So June 23rd and 24th is Oregon City Heritage Days, and it's a sanctioned Rose Festival event.
Yay. Okay. Any questions about Ermitinger? And now to the Latourette Park.
Yeah, so some exciting news here. Speaking of public involvement process, the Latourette Park, they have gone by the core team and the Latourette Park Army, have been very involved in developing plans to get from its current use to a more productive site, knowing that it is not a site that has SDC eligibility. They've been looking at partnerships and a lot of hard work behind the scenes for volunteering to try to get work done in order to make improvements at that site. One of their connections that they made recently has been with the National Park Service, who has a planning division that is interested in possibly working with that organization, as well as with the city. It is a grant opportunity, and by all accounts, seems like it will be a successful grant application process, more than likely, giving the feedback that we've received from NPS. So nothing is guaranteed, but they've reviewed the draft versions and met with the stakeholders and seem very interested in the project. So this is a straight grant with no match required, so that makes it even better. Knowing, again, resources are always tight. The other organizations that have been involved to date include DPAVE, looking at hopefully daylighting some of the ground that's there from all the asphalt that's on the property, as well as working with the local schools to do some additional work, construction classes, and artists within the local community. So really exciting. To date, again, as far as resources committed by the city, it's been primarily staff time on my behalf. So that will be something that we'll continue to track, and hopefully we'll see some fruits of that labor as we move forward.
Is it fair to assume that you're saying that if we're successful in that grant, that they would fund the construction based on their master plan?
Sorry, so confirmation, they will fund the planning process required to come up with a master plan, conceptual master plan for the site.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was really excited.
I know that. sorry to build expectations. Yeah, but it is very exciting that at least we'll have some direction, have a more comprehensive conceptual plan document that we can use. There'll probably be some additional public involvement as far as getting all the stakeholders involved and users, and looking at ways that we can hopefully bring together an operations plan that will work for volunteerism as well as city resources, knowing that we don't have as many city resources available as we would like, in addition to looking at phasing the approach to that location in a way that is as cost effective as possible.
Is it fair to say that when you get funding like that from the National Parks Foundation, that can be a catalyst for the next step? I mean, I don't know enough about those groups, and so I'm just wondering, I mean, if you've got a national organization that's really pushing you, sometimes that's momentum for the next one to jump along for maybe the parts of construction phases and things. Is that how that can go?
Yeah. So this
really?
is through the National Park Service. So I'm not sure what the opportunity would be after that there, but I would say with the number of partners that are involved, I think for future grant opportunities, I think we would probably do fairly well as we continue to try to find funding.
Doug?
I don't know if this is part of the picture, but several years ago, part of 18th Street slid down into Abernathy Canyon, and so they closed it for cars going through. But that forms the northern border of the park.
Oh, okay.
And I don't think it's part of our trail master plan, but it's a de facto trail that connects from Anchor Way all over the 15th Street. And so maybe when they're looking at it, to also look at that property, that road. On the other side is a steep slope. It's county owned, so it's a natural area. So you might take a look at that as a potential trail.
Okay.
Nobody can drive on it anymore.
Which park are you talking about?
Oh, excuse me.
That's Abernathy, isn't it?
Yeah, that's Abernathy.
Okay. I'm new, so I wanted to make sure. I was like, Doug knows what he's talking about. Let me look into it.
But thank you for walking us down that
route. My mind's on the Buena Vista house. So.
Okay, yeah, well, Leonard Park's landlocked.
Yes,
right?
indeed it is.
Sort of thinking, I swear I could drive around it.
Sorry about that.
Okay, all right. We're ready to move on to the McLaughlin to Kanema Trail planning.
Yes, so we currently have an RFP out for the McLaughlin to Kanema Trail. And this is, again, a planning RFP, so this would be to do a public involvement process, determine the appropriate route to take connecting the promenade to Old Kanema Park, and then through the Kanema Children's Park and into Kanema Bluff. So it is currently out, I believe closes May 5th or 4th, so fairly soon. We're hoping that we can get somebody on board in June and then begin the process shortly after. So it should be a fairly quick turnaround from accepting the applications to determining the bid, the appropriate bid for the project. And then it'll take about 7 months or so for us to go through the process of public involvement and determining, again, the best route and alternate routes to take connecting the promenade through that section of town. So pretty excited about that.
Is that being funded out of SDCs, or is that funded out of general fund?
So we received a grant, so a Metro nature, city nature grants enhanced.
I think it was a Trails grant.
Yeah, so it was applied for through planning. So planning secured the grant. The total project is around $30,000. 25,000 of it is grant funds. We have additional matching staff time and a little bit of money that is used from SDCs. So it is part of the loop for Oregon City Loop, and it's a priority for Metro. So we're excited to be able to hopefully make that connection and identify the easements that would be required and the appropriate direction of the trail.
The trails, I think they have trails grants are independent of the nature of the neighborhood, nature in the neighborhoods grant. I don't think it's nature in the neighborhoods. They also granted to the high school to work on that trail that connects the high school to the college.
Yeah.
And that was the same granting authority.
Okay.
So I think it's specifically for trails.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so it was done through planning. We'll be working, park staff will be working with the planning department staff as well as the consultant to begin that public involvement process right at the start of summer.
Okay, thank you. Budget discussion. The city budget's been living in my house for a few days.
So,
I thought we were moving quickly.
so the budget discussion, as I said earlier, the first budget meeting for the city will happen next Monday. So it will be a 5:30 start time at the Pioneer Center, and the public are welcome to attend. A little bit of background as the budget is developed. So the finance department's been thinking budget for many, many months. They work with the city manager, and the city manager works with each of the department heads to put together priorities for the upcoming budget season. The budget direction that was given to each of the department heads was a 0% budget. So we were asked to operate within our current allocated funds for the current biennium moving into the next biennium. So there's not a lot of change from budget to budget besides maybe moving some of the line items around. The exception to that is that the city does have a goal-setting retreat for the city commissioners, which happened, I believe, in January, if I have my months straight. And during that process, the department heads, again working with the city manager, look at priorities for each of our budgets. And so if there are funds to be spent, particularly for capital investment, above and beyond what we would have spent in previous bienniums, that is a time for us to bring that to commission to have them discuss and make priorities for their goals as well as their priorities for the upcoming biennium. So through that process, they did fund, I will say they did make it known that it would be a priority and a goal of theirs to have each of those points made over the next biennium. The official budget is made by the budget committee, which also includes members of the community in addition to the commission members. So the budget information that is provided to them through the budget process is a proposed budget, which is presented by the city manager. And once the budget committee votes to adopt or make changes, then that is the approved budget, which then we know that we have the correct appropriation of funds to use going into the next biennium. So as of right now, it's all a proposed budget and nothing is final, but it is a base point, and there is discussion that could happen amongst the budget committee and commissioners. But again, this has gone through a couple-month process of vetting what are the priorities of each of the departments, using input that we receive from all of our advisory committees to put together what we believe our priorities should be for the next biennium. So with that, I will open it up to questions and discussion. I know that Bill, I believe, was the one who had asked for this item on our agenda today. So maybe starting with Bill.
Let's see. I looked at the budget meeting agenda. It looked like Parks was going to be making a presentation towards the end of the of the meeting? Is that fair to say? Do you have an idea when you would actually be making your?
I don't. I honestly have not looked at the agenda yet, so I apologize. But we will be presenting, and primarily it's a time for the committee members to review each of the proposed budgets and then to ask questions of the department head. So it will be less of a presentation by myself, and probably more so be a chance for them to ask questions of me as we put together the budget.
And how many are we having? But maybe Doug also has an idea on this. How many meetings are there usually in the budget meetings? That it's more than one. Obviously, we're talking 3 to 4. Is that fair to say?
So they have the budget committee for the general budget, and then they also have a budget committee meeting for the urban renewal budget. And if the general budget meeting takes longer than expected and goes beyond the 1 day that is currently listed, it will bump to the next day. So currently it's scheduled for May 1st, but I believe there's a placeholder for the 2nd as well if items take longer than expected and a second day is required.
So it's a one-day thing, essentially.
Essentially.
Okay.
So is there an advantage for any of us that want to show up at least when the discussion of parks budget is mentioned and discussed? Would we have the opportunity to make input at that time or support of any of the requests? Is that something that's allowed usually by the budget committee?
You know, honestly, I have not been through a budget process yet with the city, but I would say that by this point in the process, things are pretty set. I would also say that it's always nice to have support and to have an educated group of individuals that pays attention to the budget process. So if you are interested in the budget process and want to show support for parks and trails and green space or any item within the budget process, it's nice to be there, and I'm sure that it will be noticed by the commissioners and the budget committee. I don't know that there will be an opportunity to really speak and give public
According
comment
to the
during
website,
that
there
time.
will be.
Oh, will there be?
Posted on the city website.
Okay.
The purpose of the meeting is to receive the budget message and receive comment from the public on the budget. A copy of the budget document may be inspected or obtained on or after April 14th, so they are available now at City Hall between the hours of 8 and 5. This is a public meeting where deliberation of the Budget Committee will take place. Any person may appear at the meeting and discuss the proposed programs with the Budget Committee.
I would say they generally don't take testimony lining up with line items, though. There's a section at a certain point in the meeting where it's a free-for-all. I have another question, and kind of I'm going to go out and then back again. So you weren't here 2 years ago, so you're kind of going to get hit with this late. But at the beginning of this current budget cycle, we were told that the City Commission allocated $2 million for unfunded park maintenance items.
Oh,
200,000.
200,000. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you
Yes.
for the correction. So, right?
I will have to look into that. No problem.
Is that being carried forward?
Factor of 10.
Correct.
in the
Yes.
current
So the current budget does include deferred maintenance funds. So I'll thank you for bringing that up. So there are a couple of pieces that were priorities that were funded in theory through the proposed budget. So some of the goals, and maybe I'll go through. I sent out you each received an email with the City Commission goals for 17 to 19. Those goals do also include some funding for the ones that require funding. So the goals that we have, deferred maintenance, so continue to increase funding to address deferred maintenance for the city parks and recreation facilities. So that came in the form of a FTE, a full-time park staff person that was funded in the last biennium that will roll over into this biennium, as well as additional capital funds to use for deferred maintenance issues in parks. Some of the deferred maintenance priorities that we've set are replacement of asphalt pathways, drainage issues, restroom facilities at Chapin Park.
Well, before you go too far on that,
Yeah.
I was going to request if you could do a very high level report for the next meeting, maybe just a one page that indicates the things accomplished in this budget cycle, and then what some of those top level, maybe top 5, 10 items are for the next. I think that'd be really valuable for us to see. What was achieved
specific
first.
to the deferred maintenance?
Yes,
Okay.
what was
Yep.
achieved, and then what's planned in the future. And then the reason why I asked those leading questions was I'm unable to attend that meeting Monday, but I would encourage several members to specifically get up and speak to the support of that $200,000 that hasn't occurred in the past until this last year, and we want to keep that going forward.
So I will say, coupled with that, so an additional goal is for staff to develop future revenue options for long-term maintenance of city parks and recreation facilities. So over the next 2 years, again, looking at what a long-term funding strategy would look like for maintaining the parks and recreation facilities in the way that they need to be maintained for users of our system. So we'll be looking at the best way to approach that over the next couple of years, hopefully to line us up going into the biennium after that, or any other funding opportunities that may come up between now and then.
Let me ask before. Did you mention, or did you say, and I didn't hear anyway, about asking for another FTE, a full-time equivalent position for the next biennium?
Correct. So we have over the current biennium, we had a funded FTE position for parks, which was funded with deferred maintenance money. Moving forward, we will continue to have that deferred maintenance money allocated towards an FTE position for parks, in addition to the capital funds that will be used for the deferred maintenance issues.
Where does your seasonal maintenance money come from? What line item is that then?
It's in the personnel under it's general fund supported, and under our personnel. So if you're looking in the it would be on page 65 of the budget document under personnel services for parks and cemetery maintenance expenditures.
Can I ask a clarifying question on that too? Is the $200,000 for other than the FTE, or is that FTE person included in that $200,000?
The FTE person is included in that $200,000.
That's quite a chunk.
That's what I was going to say, and that was never articulated to us 2 years ago, in my opinion.
So the previous director knew that they would be receiving the $200,000 and thought that additional FTEs was a better use of the deferred maintenance backlog in order to have staff attend to some of those deferred maintenance needs, and so to make sure that we had enough staff to take care of that work.
So that's where that report will be beneficial then, because it would indicate that.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So the other goals that we have going through the commission goals, parks maintenance facility. So in the current budget, we have $650,000 earmarked for a park operations facility at the cemetery. So that would be to replace the red tagged facility that staff have not been able to use for the last couple of years. And I'll be presenting additional information on that in the staff report. Another one is the waterfront master plan. So again, assuming that goes forward, we would have the funding beginning July 1 to implement the waterfront master plan. And then the last goal that we have under the City Commission goals and priorities is the Ermitinger House. So again, developing and implementing an operations and volunteer plan for the facility, which hopefully we will have wrapped up by the end of this biennium, but will, I'm sure, continue into the next biennium with a lot of planning and cooperation with the Friends Group.
Okay. Any more questions about the budget? Now we move on to the inserted item, which was the library sign. And I don't know where that stands right now. Who's bringing more information? Bill?
I have some current information, and I just learned of it today that Maureen Cole, who's going to be taking the lead on this, in terms of certainly of the signage for the building. I'm not certain about the park, but we're talking about two separate signs that were taken down. And she's willing. She gave some staff time that she has available, and what we did, and I say we as the chair of the neighborhood association, Denise McGriff, instigated the conversation with her, and there was a possibility that we could get together with Maureen. The best time, at least that we could grab initially, was Wednesday, May 3rd, at 9 to 10 in the morning was what Maureen had available. And what we're trying to do is, under her guidance, have one to two representatives from the library board as part of this committee, 1 to 2 representatives from PRAC. I would not be included in that. I'm representing the neighborhood association, so there'd be 1 to 2 representatives from the neighborhood association. Between those 6 bodies, stakeholders, shall we call them, we could probably come to some sorts of decisions about where to move forward on what these signs should say, and get the momentum moving to get the signs replaced. So I would urge anybody who wants to consider being on that committee. I don't know how many meetings we could have, but certainly the fewer the better, but to come to a consensus of what these signs should say and should look like. And you could probably contact Maureen Cole if you're interested, or
Well,
perhaps...
if we're going to have representatives from PRAC, that needs to be decided tonight
Yes.
and appointed. So, first of all, just ask if anybody's interested, willing, available, able.
Well, let's first of all discuss whether that's the right process to go through in the first place. I think a 9 a.m. next week meeting that is being announced informally through Bill is kind of inappropriate. She works for Phil, and this needs to be coming from Phil and directed by.
Maureen doesn't. She reports to Tony. So
I
just so
thought
that,
she reported to you.
Yeah. So she.
Separate department.
Yeah. So she reports to Tony. And I will say that I was also unaware of
Thank you.
the
Okay,
meeting
I'm not the
scheduled
only
for
one that
next
thought
week.
that.
So and a meeting that I would like to be at too as well. But
I mean, I'm very interested in
Yeah.
this, but I think it's a little quick, and I don't want McLaughlin Neighborhood Association to decide for the entire city what the name is of that park and/or library and the new sign.
And it wouldn't be decided on that particular meeting. That was just the beginning to
Yeah.
get a start. So again, that was what Maureen suggested, was having a couple from the library board, a couple from PRAC, a couple from the neighborhood association.
So I will say that Maureen and I have discussed this and thought that, again, the library being a regional facility needed representation from probably multiple neighborhood associations throughout the city. And again, I can't speak for Maureen beyond that. I know that she said it was important to have representation from many different areas. And so she did set up the meeting for next week with the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association. I'm not sure if that was the full meeting or if just to kind of begin the process
beginning
of setting
of the process.
up. Yeah.
I just learned of it this
So,
morning.
I mean, my question is, did she indicate there'd be board members from the library there?
She didn't indicate that through me. That was an email from Denise that that was times available, and that was the earliest that we could get started on it.
I guess my question is, this is something that is initiated by the neighborhood association, and have board members from the library been assigned to this?
Not that I know of.
Okay, well
Yeah.
then I think you're absolutely right. I think this meeting is intended to be one with the neighborhood associations. I think we should have some input at one point, but it doesn't sound like the intent was to include board members from the library and members from the PRAC at this point in the game, and I agree with you. I mean, I think we would have to have our own discussion. Now, we'd like to get the information, of course, that comes out from this meeting.
Yeah.
But you're quite right.
Yeah, I just don't want to. I guess my fear is the correction to the mistake occur, and we find out that the correction is up before the next meeting. That's my biggest fear
Yeah.
in all of this, is to leave one of these meetings and drive up the hill and, well, it's fixed, and I didn't even know it, and it's still wrong, or something like that. That's
Yeah.
and I'm hoping that you have your ear to that wall to make sure that doesn't
And
happen.
some of the discussion that's happened behind the scenes with staff has been, we need to do this in a thoughtful way, and that is what I took from our discussion at the last meeting and shared with Maureen in regards to Prax acknowledging that it's not going to be as easy as just fixing the sign and throwing it back up, that there's a lot of people that are interested in, again, what it says, what it looks like, knowing it's a regional facility as a library as well as a neighborhood park. It's important that we have many different voices in that conversation.
I think, if I might just come into this, I think you've got the question of the signage and so forth, but I think there has to be a mechanism that somehow the story, the history of that site has to be told. And it isn't only the library and it isn't only the park. I mean, it's got a long history, and there are many elements that have gone into that. And at some point, it'd be nice if that story could be told in some way where people can either read it or see it on a video or something of that nature about the history of that site.
Yeah. I agree, Doug, and I was going to kind of articulate a conversation I had with Phil after our last meeting. Is I'm not even opposed to us kind of possibly correcting the name if we need to formally reconvene a naming convention and adjust the name to make that fit. That's not a bad thing to do. It seems like the will of the library is to call it Oregon City Public Library, and it seems like the goal for us in general was to have the name Carnegie on the park, and to call it Carnegie Library Park anymore may be inappropriate, but shortening the name would have a much
Carnegie
better
Park?
flow and would support a sign very well. So, it wouldn't take but a small subcommittee meeting to make those sorts of recommendations back to PRAC,
Right.
and we could move forward. And
Yep.
Okay, well, it's, obviously something that still needs to be discussed. You've got me on a merry-go-round at this point, thinking about all the possibilities and options, and we need to talk to the library board, and they need to talk to us, and it just...
Would it be appropriate to maybe at least vote on, as a group, representative to
be on the sign
continue to
committee?
to be that in between for that committee, if and when it's decided for the sign specifically? And I do recognize Sean's interest in maybe looking at the naming of the park, and would say that we want to make sure that the park sign and language is appropriate, and that an agreement from this group as well as city staff that it represents the park's interests as well.
But you're not talking about somebody to attend this meeting.
Those would be two separate.
Yes.
So we would
Okay.
need to have maybe, if interested, as a group to determine who would be
Yeah.
assigned as that ad hoc group for the sign, if and when that does come together, as well as maybe as a group, if you were interested in creating a ad hoc group for the naming of the park, and to relook at that as appropriate within our naming policy.
I would be happy to volunteer, and I was involved with the naming last time, and I would like to see Doug on it, because you're the one who initiated the naming change last time, at least. That's my personal opinion.
It was a transitionary thing. I wanted to just clarify it. For a period of time, that building was under Parks and Recreation, and
Yeah.
and that's what triggered signage and so forth, and the reuse of the building.
Yep. And now we're just talking about the park.
That's right.
We are.
Yes, I
That's all
understand.
we
that.
care about.
Yes.
All right, so So for this ad hoc sign committee,
we don't care about those stinking libraries.
And I prefer an
they are well taken care of themselves, and wonderfully and marvelously so.
and Phil, I'd prefer an evening meeting.
Well,
Okay,
I will
so
note
Sean
that.
and Doug, is there anyone else who is dying to be on this ad hoc committee?
Use the term loosely.
I would second that motion if it's in a form of a motion.
Okay, so Bill has made a motion that we form this committee of those two representatives,
And then I'll second it.
and Sean seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstain? Motion carries.
So just for confirmation, so this is for the ad hoc naming committee,
Yes.
or this is for the signage?
It's,
Or
All of the
both.
above
Both.
is how
Okay,
my
perfect.
intent.
Excellent.
Well, now that's what I wanted for clarification. The ad hoc meeting, if you're talking about the one on May 3rd,
Well, we will make sure that it is at an appropriate time where everyone can be
okay, all right,
involved.
because it sounds.
Sean can't make 9 o'clock
Yeah,
on Wednesday
but-
morning.
But the thing
Public
is,
library.
yeah, I just don't want to be involved in that neighborhood meeting without being specifically invited.
So-
to be
Yeah,
there.
so I will confirm with Maureen
you.
and make sure
Yeah.
it's appropriate for PrAC members to be at that meeting, or if it is more of a
Just get to-
starter discussion with the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association.
I think it should be with the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association at this point, because unless our issue is the library sign, and I just don't want to be confused with the library board or anything else.
Yep. So I will communicate back to the group, and more specifically working with Sean and Doug for finding an appropriate time to meet with Bill and Denise and Maureen and whatever other associated individuals for the signage group.
Okay, thank you. Any other general business? Needs to be brought forward at this time, because we're running short here. Recreation reports, I think we all got copies of those.
You can have member reports.
What? Did I skip member reports? I did. All right, we'll jump back to member reports and staff reports. All right. Member reports. Are we going to start again with Roger?
Sure. Okay, I have some items to report for the Pioneer Center. Trip registration opened a couple weeks ago, and most were filled upon the registration day. 2 AARP taxes have been completed, and I just want to, the AARP wrote a letter of thanks to the Pioneer Center. I'm just going to give a few points from the letter, that they did over 400 returns this year in total, and those who got refunds, our site's refund total was just over $315,000. And let's see, despite new software printing problems and additional entries we needed to make this year, the Pioneer site volume was up 18% over last year. So they thank the staff for all the work that they did, at the Pioneer Center staff. Number 3, a basement drain line in the Pioneer Center will need to be replaced, and we're getting quotes. It will take about 2 weeks to fix. 4, the Seed to Supper class is full and started April 6th. 5, we have ended the program of offering medical equipment for community use. It was determined it was a very high liability. We will refer people to other resources. And that's all I have tonight.
You didn't do any other parks things?
Well, I did other parks things, but I'm sure he knows of other people that I don't want
Okay.
to. I want to burn everything up.
All right, that's the Pioneer Center representative report. Thank you so much, Roger. Lisa.
I feel like I'm a tourist in my own town. I attended another tour on April 1st. Some other individuals attended that as well. Three Rivers Historical Tour with Jerry Herman's group. Very interesting. My husband joined me, and he was thrilled about it also. We just love being in Oregon City, the history of it. Unfortunately, it was a very, very rainy day.
We got a little wet.
We got a little wet, but we thoroughly enjoyed it. In addition to that, the Blue Heron Tour on April 14th and last night's meeting. So it's really interesting to be a tourist in your own town. I've never done that before in another city that I've lived in, but I think that Oregon City has so much history to it. As far as my specific neighborhood, Park Place, the park looks really well. Things are going well there. A little wet, but that's to be expected this time of year. And seeing some of the citizens speak about Filbert Run and a couple of the other parks, I feel like we're lucky. Well maintained, no issues there. Individuals are using it. The neighbor, and I agree with you, Doug. I think that if Filbert Run was in a fully developed the way that it's intended to be or wanted to be, I think more residents will visit it. And I think there's also an opportunity. We don't realize, and I'm one of those individuals that during the day, maybe out with my dog, stop at a park. Oh, what a pretty park, I'll stop. So even people who don't live in the area, people on their lunch hours, that's another, people don't realize that too. Sometimes if I happen to have a day off from work, I'll go to our park and there's individuals in the area having their lunch. So I think that's another opportunity for more individuals to enjoy a park. So lots of touring. That's what I've been doing this month.
So were the burned playground structures replaced, or
No.
what's the word on that?
No. It does look like, and I'm going to presume it was a service facilities representative, what they did, there's the part that was burned is now, what they did is they cut that away and it's blocked off. So it was, I don't know how to describe it, I can draw it in the air, but it's, if you can visualize two playground pieces of equipment and there was a tunnel connecting, it was the tunnel that was burned.
So they're used
So
individually now?
yeah, now they're stopped. There's a, I think they used wood, and they cut out wood circles so that children can't, fall off the equipment. People still use it. I've been there. I go there every day, but 2-3 times a week I see people there with their children.
And the company, a little background on that, the company that manufactured the equipment is no longer in business, and we cannot find a replacement piece. And the other manufacturers of playground equipment will not take the liability of putting one of their pieces of equipment attached to another manufacturer's equipment at the park. So we are currently looking at other solutions to continue the use of that playground. So hopefully we'll have a solution identified as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, every year Earth Day we do work there at the last 3 or 4 years do work at Abernathy Creek Park, and we have the junior ROTC working with us. Last year we find that the snowberry is very effective in terms of keeping the other invasives out. So last year, if we can get the snowberry moving, we removed a whole lot of reed canary grass so the snowberry could take over that particular area. The notion that we would plant snowberries this year, and we have snowberries to plant. The difficulty is you move one invasive and another one immediately moves in, and that was blackberries. So our Earth Day was removing blackberries and in other areas clematis, which had grown very thickly. and they did a very effective job. The junior ROTC people weren't the only ones there. Roger was there with us working. So on City Cleanup Day, which is this coming Saturday, we're actually going to plant in the snowberries in the areas that we actually remove those invasives. And also another, snowberries are very good because they tend to stabilize the soil in the banks, as does another plant that we've introduced called nine bark, which we did plant in that particular site. So it's an ongoing effort, but we're actually the area is far less invasive than it was before. And thank you, Roger, for coming out. I appreciate it.
Fun.
No, this is the park with the Buena Vista House.
No, it's not.
No.
This is a.
Oh, this is the little
this is a
park.
small park.
That's along Abernethy Creek.
It's along Abernethy Creek. It actually was procured by the city with FEMA funds. FEMA funds were being made available to the county to move their county shops. The county didn't want them, so the city bought, I believe, 5 houses, and there's a small barn there, and demolished those and set a park there. It's actually an oxbow that's there at that particular park. A rather nice park to visit.
Okay. Mr. Cook.
The only thing I have is feedback from my 5-year-old about Chapin Park being underwater. So as of last Saturday, most of the water was gone. The netting was still up, but it was pushed down by kids, and they were all playground equipment. So not unpredictable there, but the parking there was completely maxed out. We had soccer shots going on for my kid and several baseball games going on at the same time. So there's lots of parking out on the road, people crossing that busy road. But do we have an update on the drainage issue? I know you had some RFP out for that.
Yeah,
didn't you?
so we have 3 companies that have provided, 2 that have provided bids to us, one that can't make it out until middle of May. So our hope is to, once we have the third quote back, be able to pull the trigger on a contract with one of the firms to have the work completed sometime by mid-June. So we're hoping to get the work done prior to kids being out of school, which is somewhere in the June 16th, 17th, right in there.
23rd or something.
Yeah, probably. So yeah, as of right now, it is half underwater again. I was out there earlier today with the wet weather we're getting. Yeah, so we have unstaked the swing set area, but yeah, the netting will stay up until probably we know that we'll have a little bit drier of conditions and that it won't continue to be a hazard.
Okay. And because I'm fairly new, is parking always been an issue at the park?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
When
I figured.
when little kids' games are happening,
Yeah.
it's always been an issue.
Okay.
Mike.
That's it? Okay. A couple of weeks ago, the dog and I were evicted from the house while my wife was having a baby shower. And we spent a couple hours at Clackamas Park. And I really got an eye-opening on deferred maintenance. I mean, I know part of the issues at Clackamas is, it's underwater. So we're always going to have that. But you mentioned tree roots and pathways. It's everywhere. The benches are rotten. It's, if you really get, I think the staff does an amazing job at as far as deep as they are able to get with the budget and time. But when you really walk and look in detail at a park, it's frightening what all really needs to be done. Anyway, Parks Foundation, just a quick update for you. We met last Tuesday night. We're working on 3 different grants. Hopefully we'll get 2 or maybe all 3 of those. One is from the Hardy Plant Society for plantings that would be basically at the VFW end of the promenade. One for invasive species removal in Waterboard Park. And one in conjunction with the End of the Oregon Trail Center to create a children's nature playground type area at that site. So we have fingers crossed on that. Just a couple of things we were able to raise with the help of Oregon City Brewing Company and their Tuesday night charity pints night. $260 some odd from that.
Very nice.
The number that is amazing to me, and those of you that know Dee Dee Dalsrud know what a tiger she is, and I'm also going to call out and thank Roger on this because he's the backup person on this. So at 10 cents now and 5 cents before, imagine how many bottles and cans $1,400 is. We've raised $1,400 from that program. Wow. And I think I just happen to think, I guess it's a coincidence that the two biggest things we've done both have to do with drinking.
Those are water bottles
Hopefully.
for recycling.
It's just a coincidence, but a public thank you to Dee Dee and to Roger because they're the ones that really make that happen. And I have two things for you here where you can one is totally painless, one is maybe a little physical pain. Fred Meyer has their community rewards program. We have a number now on that, and these are the instructions on how you can go. If you have your rewards card, you sign up, and then once you sign up as the Parks Foundation as the beneficiary, then it's automatic, and it doesn't cost you anything, and they just chip in a little bit to the Parks Foundation. So please do that. The other thing, on Saturday, May 6th, and the information's coming around on that, we are in conjunction with Solve, doing an Ivy Pole event in Waterboard Park, Saturday, May 6th from 9 to 12. You can go to the Solve website and sign up ahead of time, and you do a little online waiver thing, or we'll do the little online waiver thing with you on that Saturday morning, the 6th, and we'd love to see you there. And that's it.
So I have one topic I want to bring up, and I've already talked to Phil about this, and it's an issue that comes about when we allow users in our ball fields about equality. And when the organizations deal with both boys and girls, they should be using our parks in an equitable way. That has not been occurring, and with one of the organizations. And when the issue came to me, I talked to Phil about it and gave him some heads up. And the organization is doing some self-policing right now. There's an attorney involved, and but it just made me think about how we, as a city, can protect ourselves from potential issues. Not being an attorney, what this would remind me of would be like a Title IX issue at a school, and I don't know if the city has a concern like that. You know, I don't know if there's other Title IX type ramifications that can come into play with park services and not being equal. But I would encourage us to keep this type of a topic, in our thoughts as we're talking to neighbors and users of the park. And I think that staff should probably look at how reservations go out, and possibly even some sort of a certification that yes, I'm using this facility in an equitable manner. At least that covers the city. But it's a topic that really bothered me between boys and girls. I have two young daughters, and to see that girls are put on some of the most inferior fields while boys exclusively 100% had the primary fields for entire seasons, that's not right. And we as PRAC should be supporting equality and making sure those things aren't occurring. So I wanted to bring that topic up.
Okay, thank you.
The parks near on Washington Street, starting with Barclay and some of the other smaller parks, as well as some of the larger parks along the bluff, as well as through the McLaughlin neighborhood, seem to have their fair share of homelessness, and along with that, drugs and alcohol, of course. And so the neighborhood associations, I know, are working with the officer that we met at our last meeting and letting him know that these are targets, and to have his eye and ear open for complaints from people who are seeing more of this, and there's other ways maybe we can address those problems, and the neighborhood was going to be looking into possibly getting some kinds of exclusions, enforcing those exclusions, so that park users who want to use the park for the right reasons aren't so intimidated by some of the disgraceful things that do happen in the public for different reasons. And there might even be a possibility of trying to, we're going to pursue an ordinance perhaps as a neighborhood association for the parks, but primarily anywhere in public space, to try to limit the distribution of the malt liquor and the fortified wines that are being sold at a couple of locations in that area, and with the hope that might reduce the amount of public drunkenness that occur in the parks. And so that's just a downside of what has gone on, and we will see more of that as the weather gets nicer now. And so we need to, all of us, the whole city needs to be reminded that that's something that we're going to be facing, certainly as a committee here, when people come to ask for suggestions on how to combat the issues that happen when you're taking a tour of whether it's Abernathy Park or Atkinson Park or we see a lot of tourists in the parks in that section of town too that are intimidated, or at least they get the wrong perception of what our city is really about when they see that much going on in public. So that's something that will be something that we will be dealing with for quite some time, and there are possible remedies. So I'm hoping that as a collective measure that people share ideas on what could and should work to be able to reduce the amount of those kinds of activities.
Thank you. And speaking of homeless in the area, just yesterday, Metro was doing a lot of cleaning up of Newell Creek Canyon, and the first vehicle down the street was the Sheriff's Department. So they went down to help roust out some of our campers, and then they're doing some more surveying work about where they're going to be putting in those trails and getting ready for some construction of the trails down in Newell Creek Canyon. And I thank Lisa for reminding me of the April 1st tour that we went on with Jerry Herman and his heritage things, and I know Roger was there too. And despite it being a terribly rainy day, it turns out that there were 2 big groups touring Oregon City that day, and we ran into the other group doing a scavenger hunt. They came out of the downtown Oregon City offices, and they all took off in different directions, and then met, and we all ended up meeting at the top of the elevator at the same time, and speaking with these people that were from Europe. And it was a whole big tour bus that was traveling around in Oregon and had been brought by Travel Oregon. And Clackamas County was showing them Clackamas County, and then they were going to be heading out to Multnomah Falls on this tour bus. But to be able to spend just a few minutes talking with tourists from Europe that are here in our little town and about what are some of the exciting things that they saw. And they just said the view from the top of the elevator was one of the most beautiful things they've seen. And by the way, the Swifts are back. Yeah. So last night there was some postings from the Arch Bridge Brewery that the Swifts were going down the chimney. So now is the time to go watch them. And the best place to view them is from the top of the promenade. The elevator's closed at that time, so you can't get out to view it. But the Swifts go down a little bit, like 9 o'clock or so. So just so you know, to get out there and see that. So spring has sprung, lots of activities, ivy pulls, and we're going to be looking forward to our concerts in the park coming up soon. And has the voting closed for the movies in the park?
Ooh, that's an excellent question. I'm not sure.
Okay,
I can find out.
It seems like the voting usually closes around the end of April.
Yeah.
So we need to check on that. So if it's still available, get in there and vote for your favorite movie. And so next month we should be getting a report as to which movies those are going to be this summer. Just trying to think if there's anything else from member reports. So we can move on to staff report, but it's after 9.
So I'll move through this as quickly as possible. Recreation report, which you already have in your email and should have had an opportunity to look through. The park operations facility, I have a fancy little PowerPoint, but with our technical difficulties, maybe I will move past that. If you would, most of the pictures that were used were in the packets that you saw. So the packet that was included,
We can see those on our screen.
Oh, okay. So the current conditions photos.
Oh no, it's not on that part.
Oh,
Just
oh, oh,
go
oh,
to
the
your
agenda.
agenda and
Yeah,
go
of
to
course.
documents.
Yes.
There you go. So we're all looking at the lovely pictures of a failed building here.
Yeah, so if you look at the Park Ops current conditions photo, it shows you the first page is the primary facility that's been red tagged. And
Is that why the windows are boarded up?
correct. So that oh, there we go. Touch
Little
screen.
mold on the walls.
So which is included also on page 2. So page 2, figure 1 shows the park operations building, which has been red tagged for a couple of years. The next photo down is the restroom. So those are the only public restrooms for the cemetery. Again, the cemetery serving large community events such as Memorial Day and the Murdered Children lot. We're the regional facility for the families of murdered children. And we have very outdated, non-ADA compliant restrooms. So those are included in part of the proposal. The figure 3 and figure 4 show the interior of the restrooms. Again, not much to look at, and don't meet current code as far as the space required for ADA and movement within the space. Figure 5 on the next page is the rented pod that we use for our operations staff. Again, so that is for all of our staff to maintain all of our sites and facilities. Very small rented pod that doesn't have enough space, also doesn't have the appropriate facilities that would be required of
They're
maintaining.
supposed to be out in the parks anyway. They don't.
So figure 6 just shows some of the lockers, as does figure 7, general interior of the space. The next one, last one, figure 8, is the adjacent metal shop building. It's not included in the project, but just so that you have a idea of the current facilities that are there. And it's also not much to look at, but using the limited funds that we have to the best use of the community is what we're attempting to do with building the new Park Ops building. So the other document that I will call attention to is the Park Ops site plan. So it says Park Ops site plan 2016 March 29th.
Okay.
So this is the layout that we have for the schematic design for the new facility. So the existing shop in the lower left-hand side is that building that I showed on the previous photo. The existing office building up above is the current entrance for families that would be looking to purchase plot space and make reservations for their family members. And then the middle section is the new facility. So the new facility would, again, the process would be to demolish the current building that's there, demolish the current restrooms that are there, and incorporate those two uses into the new envelope of that building. It's fairly tight still. It is for current staff. It's not sized for future growth. It is sized for current use. We might be able to squeeze another couple of staff members into that space, but it's not going to do much more than provide an adequate space for our park operations staff to use. We're currently looking at possible phasing of developing this structure in a way that we could possibly do a phase 2 development, which could include demolition of the existing office building to the north, and then incorporating that structure into the current proposed structure. The existing office building is literally a house, if you've not been on site, and does not meet current code or requirements for ADA access work facilities.
Would showers be considered at all at some point in the future?
Yeah, so a shower would be included. Again, this is a schematic design and was very, very rough. We did not want to put a bunch of money into developing plans at this point, but it would include shower facilities to allow staff for chemical spills or just day-to-day muddy out in the field and needing to clean up after a shift. So this will be something we'll bring back to Commission at some point soon. Hopefully we'll receive funding from Commission at the budgetary process and be able to move forward with more certainty for our planning efforts. Our goal would be to get this done as soon as possible to allow staff to have an appropriate facility.
So was there ever any discussion about the property that's next to the cemetery there that's privately owned still? Mm-hmm. About, what's going on with that?
Quite possibly.
Okay. And that house has a funny history of its own, and knowing the family that lived there, and so I was always kind of wondering what's happening on that. So
yeah, we've had some discussions with the property owner, but and nothing's.
Okay, is it still her son that lives in Sacramento is the property owner?
It's a development company. I'm not sure it's a developer.
Okay, so it's
yeah.
All right.
They've owned the home for about 10 years, I believe.
Okay.
It's currently rented.
Yes. Yeah. I got a tour of the refurbished for inside because of what one of the renters had done, looking for the hidden bags and bags of gold that were supposedly had been in the walls, and so it really just completely destroyed the interior of an old house. So there was all new drywall and new stairs, and so I got to see the old and the new, and the new kitchen is really quite nice. Okay, that was just an aside there. All right, looking at the aerial is what reminded me of that house. Okay.
And then, so the next item, Oregon State Enhancement Day, I think was already noted, but this Saturday at Wesley Lynn Park, 9 a.m., going to be planting some trees and spreading some chips, and at noon there'll be a light lunch served, but encourage everyone to come out to Wesley Lynn Park on Saturday at 9 o'clock.
So there'll be activities both at Wesley Lynn and at Abernethy?
There will also be activities downtown doing
Okay.
some of the planting beds.
But everybody's meeting at Wesley Lynn and getting your location orders from there, and then meeting back at Wesley Lynn. Is that?
I'm not
I mean,
sure
that's
what
how they've kind of done it. And it used to be done at we'd meet down at Clackamas, and we'd sign the forms saying that we're not, if we get hurt, it's not your fault, and then go out wherever we were. I was usually Singer Hill pulling ivy, and then go back at noon for a light.
It's my understanding the downtown folks are just meeting downtown or meeting at City Hall, but
Okay.
that it's been coordinated through Public Works. I believe the main Enhancement Day activities are meeting at Wesley Lynn Park, and we'll go out from there.
Okay.
But again, it's been primarily managed through code enforcement.
Code
has
enforcement,
been taking
yeah.
the lead.
Is this
Yep.
the first year they've been at Wesleyan?
This is the first year where they've done the main meeting at West Lynn, and it's just because the Clackamat's so muddy that
Yeah.
there was limited parking, and Wesley Lynn does have one of the nicest
my arrow
gazebo.
says some people are going to move it to back of the park.
Okay, so this Saturday is going to begin at Wesley Lynn Park at 9 a.m.
Correct.
All right. Future agenda items.
I would
Doug.
like, go ahead. Doug?
This is, periodically, we try to put a vote to the people of closing down some of the smaller parks, and then it never passes. But I don't think there's any indication of how funds would be used if those properties were sold. And you know, some of those parks are just acre parks and may have a slide on it, and that's about the extent of them, and they're spread out through the Rivercrest area and some of those areas and so on. It would seem to me that if there was a dedicated effort to say how those funds would be utilized, and in terms of perhaps I mentioned last time that between West Leland Park and the Hazel Grove Westling Farms, there's nothing there, and we have no way of getting more larger parks into the newer neighborhoods. Whether we should consider the possibility of going to the voters and seeing if we can in fact sell those properties with a specific purpose of buying additional lands in which we can actually build better parks. I mean, once the land is gone in development, it is gone.
I second that. That's a great idea.
So you want that as a future agenda
discussion
item,
item,
just
yeah, yes.
as to which one of those little neighborhood parks might be,
Well, it would be more than one, but
which ones of the
You'd be the
neighborhood
first one up on
parks.
the block.
might be sellable. Okay. It's always good to think outside the box for me. Thank you. Okay. Sean.
I would request that over a period of the next few months that Phil would invite a department head, you know, like Jonathan and Denise, to come in and give kind of reports on their specific areas and focus. There's some new people here, new seasoned people, but that may not know the programs they're offering and the successes that are going on and what some of their challenges are. And those are always really beneficial to me.
For the pool and, yeah.
Yeah.
Great idea.
how old do
Rochelle.
you have to be a seasoned person?
You qualify.
Thank you. I wasn't going to hit.
We're there, Doug.
I'll be rude to say that.
So I have brought that up to Denise somewhat recently, and she said it was typical that they would do that at the end of the summer to kind of talk about what had happened and successes and things like that. Is that of interest, or maybe before summer to more talk about what we're doing before the season?
I'd kind of like to hear it before.
Yeah.
And then after also, just
I'm not sure
plans
that
and successes.
I'm not sure that in September, waiting to September is important to me, because they can still talk about last year's successes and programs and what we're planning for this year. And if it's the Pioneer Center, it's much more annual rather than seasonal. The pool, same thing. No, I'm not sure that needs to wait.
Yeah,
I would say as it fits
I agree.
into the agenda.
I think the idea of having a couple
Certainly
times
better.
per year, report out like that, they have the opportunity to do kind of like a lessons learned report. Things that they've tried or maybe wanted to do, didn't get to for whatever reason.
of course, there's a lot of possibilities there, but since we actually own the end of the Trail Interpretive Center, it'd be nice to hear a bit about their program too.
Yeah. Yeah, we've never had them before. That'd be great.
Yeah.
So would assumption being maybe one
Yes.
presentation over the next couple of months, have each of the managers come and
Yes.
Okay. One
Great.
each month. Yeah.
Also, if we could, at least for me, I don't know if it needs to be future agenda items, but one thing I forgot to ask you about is, do we have the timeline now on getting the backboard for the pickleballers installed?
So it has been purchased,
Okay.
and we do not have a date for installation, but I know it has been purchased and will be installed once we have it. We've been down. We had a staff person that resigned, and so we're down one current staff person, and we're in the process of starting to ramp up for seasonals. So once we have additional staff, it is an item that will be addressed as soon as possible.
Thank you.
Yes.
I know, because they've got my number. And they find me at public events, bend in my ear.
Thank you for...
But as soon as we can get a specific date on that, if you could let them know and let me know. So
Yeah,
we can,
once it's on site, I'll try to remember to reach back out to let you know that it's here and that we have a date selected for installation.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
I have an item I mentioned once before that I'd like to not necessarily be a standing agenda item, but certainly one that we need to think about and maybe originate at this committee. And that would be how to get more funding for parks and recreation. And I would like to suggest that we perhaps, certainly after the budget cycle's begun, but at least get an education, an idea of what it takes to form a service district. A county run by the county, whether it's called South Clackamas or however we want to incorporate that with Oregon City as a major contributor to that district. But I think that's something that we should look at. Maybe we could ask Mr. Kunkel to maybe be able to brief us on the pros and cons of that, or how we go about.
Well,
go ahead.
You came from one, right?
Yeah.
Roscoe County is a...
Yeah, so I manage a special district.
Yeah.
And, I would say also that part of the direction that's been given to staff is long-term funding strategies for operating the park system. Mm-hmm. So I would imagine that looking at all different avenues, including, creation of a special district, which would specifically fund park improvements, developments, I think.
Cultural, museums,
yeah,
the whole...
would be an option. I would be hesitant to prematurely bring that specifically without looking at maybe the broader scope. And I would imagine also that once we start down the road of the planning for what that could look like, there will probably be opportunity for PRAC to have representation on that group of trying to determine what the appropriate funding mechanisms or avenues of funding the park system would look like. But I'm more than well. I mean, I can definitely set up if it's of interest. The libraries have a special district that helps to fund quite a bit of their operating revenues, and then there are local special districts, North Clackamas and Tualatin Hills.
I was going to ask maybe as another idea is to invite a director or a representative of those districts to come make a presentation, at least why it's effective or how it's effective, or why they seem to be successful.
And I can share my experience when I was in Malala on the city council there. We actually had Tualatin Hills come out and give a presentation on that. It was very enlightening, and they did not try to candy coat it at all. It's a huge endeavor, but they did have a lot of success. But there was a lot of work that went into it from the grassroots on up. So, but it was very enlightening, and so something like that would be helpful, just to get a perspective of what it takes.
As you were first mentioning that, my thought was, because Scott Archer and his position plus his experience here, it'd be interesting to see him there come back and share perspective as to, I've sat where you're at, and now I sit where I'm at now, and the pros and cons, and you're not candy coating it. That'd be interesting to see.
Yeah, I can set that up. So of interest would be looking specifically at inviting Scott, or looking at other special district operations.
Maybe, for instance, Bend has a special district, recreation service district, and I'm not suggesting they come here to talk, but maybe there's some homework that could be done, at least emails exchanged on the ability and why it was formed, how it's formed, the benefits and their perspective. I'm not sure of all the service districts in our.
Yeah, and I can speak a little. I was director of a special district for 2 years, and I can speak a little bit to the history of that.
Was it already in place when you went there? Okay, so you weren't there when it was set up.
Yeah, there's also there's a couple special districts that have formed recently that might have current data to share as far as processes and hiccups along the way. In the Dalles, it was formed in the mid 80s, and it was a byproduct of the city wanting out of doing parks and recreation. But there's in southern Wasco County, they actually just started a special district, so they went through all that process fairly recently. So if it's of interest, I could probably do a little bit of research and current practices and special districts that are located within Oregon and what that looks like. A lot of it's dependent upon tax rates and how successful folks can be in their districts, and there are pros and cons on both sides. But we can definitely set up a presentation on that and maybe invite a couple of folks and see if they're available to do that. So I'll work with Scott and maybe see if I can maybe get another presenter that might be able to give a different perspective.
Would working with the city managers at some point, maybe to, if we felt as a group that this is something we want to explore further once we've had, I don't know if sufficient's the right word, but enough information to say this is something that we probably should look at in moving that up to the commission level for them to understand what we're trying to accomplish, and maybe that's long. I'm not talking about perhaps it's going to take months, obviously, before the commission is even involved in something like that. But I just was curious what the.
I would be hesitant to bring anything to commission about long-term funding strategies without first going through a thoughtful process of determining those long-term funding strategies, which is something that we'll undertake over the next year and a half. So that there is a process. There will be a process. Staff will begin working on that and probably using PRAC as a resource, and then again bringing on a consultant to help us to figure out what next steps and best scenarios we might be able to undertake.
All right, thank you.
Yeah,
It's nice to have all those options, so we can, really debate the pros and cons of them to really see those. Thank you. Thank you, Bill. Any other future agenda items? All right. Well, hearing none, and if I'm really quick about this, our next scheduled meeting is for Thursday, May 25th at 7 o'clock here in this room. And with that, we will adjourn.